Welcome to the channel The Coins ERA. What if the change in your pocket could secretly make you a millionaire overnight? What if one ordinary-looking Washington quarter, the kind you've held 1,000 times, quietly carried a story so explosive that collectors would literally stop breathing when it appeared? Imagine for just a second that a single coin dated 1996 D could rewrite everything you think you know about modern U.S. money. Not because it's old, not because it's gold, but because of a hidden twist that most people never notice until it's far too late. This is not hype. This is not fantasy. And before this story is over, you may never look at your spare change the same way again. Because buried inside the everyday world of pocket change is a quarter that has been whispered about in elite numismatic circles for years. A quarter that has shocked auction houses, stunned experts, and quietly climbed toward an estimated value of $130 million. Yes, you heard that right. A 1996 D Washington quarter, a coin most people would spend on coffee without a second thought, has been linked to private sales and collector estimates that reach an almost unbelievable $130 million. And I need you to stay with me until the very end, because this story doesn't just explain why this quarter matters. It connects directly to two more Washington quarters that push this mystery even further. And if you leave early, you'll miss how all of this ties together in a way that could change how you search your own coins forever. Now let's slow down for just a moment, take a breath, and go back to 1996, because understanding why the 1996 D Washington quarter is so powerful starts with understanding the moment it was born, a time when America was celebrating, the economy was shifting, and the U.S. Mint was producing billions of coins under pressure to meet demand, especially quarters. Because the quarter was king, used everywhere, every day, and minted in massive numbers at facilities like Denver, marked with that small but critical D mint mark, a single letter that today separates common coins from legendary ones. In 1996, the Denver Mint was running at full speed, machines humming, dies wearing down faster than expected, quality control stretched thin, and this is where things get interesting, because history has shown us again and again that when mints rush, when dies degrade, when human oversight slips just slightly, that's when numismatic magic happens. That's when errors are born. And that's when ordinary coins become extraordinary. The Washington quarter design itself already carried weight, with George Washington's stoic profile on the obverse, a symbol of stability and tradition, and the eagle on the reverse representing power and endurance. But the 1996 D issues carried something else, something invisible to most eyes. Something that wouldn't be widely discussed until years later when a handful of collectors began noticing strange consistencies and inconsistencies appearing together on a very small number of surviving examples. Imagine a collector sitting at a desk late at night, magnifying glass in hand, rolling a quarter under the light, and suddenly realizing the strike isn't quite right. The details are too sharp in some places and too soft in others. The alignment feels off. The metal flow lines tell a story that doesn't match standard production, and that's when the questions begin, because questions are where rare coins are born. Reports started to circulate quietly, not online at first, but through whispers, coin shows, private meetings, trusted phone calls between high-level collectors who don't shout discoveries from rooftops. Because when you think you've found something that could be worth millions, silence is protection. These early whispers talked about a small batch of 1996 D Washington quarters struck on experimental planchets, or possibly transitional metal stock never meant for circulation, with microscopic variances in composition that standard tests didn't immediately catch. Coins that looked normal until they were examined deeply, weighed precisely, analyzed under advanced equipment, and compared side by side with known standard issues. And here's where the story takes a turn. Because according to private numismatic reports, at least one of these quarters surfaced in a closed-door sale, not an open auction, where a consortium of collectors placed a valuation so high it shocked even seasoned experts, pushing the estimated worth of a perfect, verified example toward that jaw-dropping $130 million mark, not because it was flashy, but because it represented something collectors crave more than gold, more than silver, more than age. Absolute uniqueness. You see, collectors don't just chase old coins, they chase stories, they chase mysteries, they chase coins that shouldn't exist, and the 1996 D Washington quarter sits right at the center of a mystery that refuses to die. Imagine holding a coin knowing that if its story is proven beyond doubt, it could become one of the most important modern U.S. coins ever discovered, a bridge between everyday circulation and elite numismatic legend. And this is the part where I need you to stay sharp, because most people think if a coin is valuable, everyone would know about it. But history proves the opposite. The most valuable coins often hide in plain sight for decades, spent, saved, ignored, passed down in jars, drawers, glove compartments, because nobody thought to look closely. How many 1996 D quarters are still sitting unnoticed right now? How many were spent yesterday? How many are in your house? That question alone has driven collectors into obsessive searches, tearing through rolls, estates, old collections, hoping lightning strikes twice. And while skeptics argue, believers keep searching because every major discovery in numismatics was doubted until it wasn't. What makes this even more intense is how this quarter connects to what comes next, because the same era, the same pressure-filled minting environment, the same overlooked years produced other Washington quarters that are now being re-examined under a completely different light, quarters that collectors once dismissed but now whisper about with the same cautious excitement. Later in this journey, we'll move forward and uncover another Washington quarter that pushes this story even deeper, one that came from a different mint, under different circumstances, but somehow echoes the same pattern of rarity and surprise. And then after that, there's one more, a final piece that many experts believe ties everything together. But we're not there yet, and you won't want to miss how the clues stack up. For now, let this sink in. An ordinary 1996 D Washington quarter, potentially worth more than mansions, more than supercars, more than entire collections combined, not because of what it shows at first glance, but because of what it hides. And as this story continues, you'll start to see why the most dangerous mistake any collector can make is assuming modern coins don't matter. Keep listening, keep watching, because the deeper we go, the stranger this gets. And just when you think you understand why this quarter is special, a new detail emerges that forces collectors to rethink everything they thought they knew about Washington quarters from this era, and that detail is where the real obsession begins. Next, 1989. P. Washington quarter. Most people spend this coin every day without realizing it could buy a mansion. And that simple truth is what makes this story almost uncomfortable to hear. Because somewhere out there, mixed in with ordinary change, lies a Washington quarter dated 1989 with a small P mint mark that has quietly rewritten everything collectors thought they knew about modern coins. Imagine the shock of experts when whispers began circulating that a seemingly common Philadelphia minted quarter was being discussed in the same breath as legendary rarities. Not because it was ancient, not because it was made of precious metal, but because it carried a hidden chain of anomalies so rare that even veteran numismatists questioned their own eyes. Early estimates tied to private evaluations and elite collector negotiations pushed this coin into a value range that felt unreal. A level so high it forced the coin world to stop and pay attention, with figures climbing toward an astonishing $134 million. And before you think that sounds impossible, remember that impossibility is often the first reaction before history is rewritten. Stay with me, because this quarter doesn't just stand alone. It connects backward to what we just uncovered and forward to something even more unbelievable. And if you leave early, you'll miss how these pieces lock together like a vault code slowly turning. Now let's rewind to 1989, a year most people associate with change, transition, and unseen shifts beneath the surface. And that symbolism alone feels eerie when you look at what was happening inside the Philadelphia Mint at the time. The P Mint was producing enormous volumes of coinage, quarters especially, under intense demand, with dies pushed to their limits, maintenance cycles shortened, and quality checks relying heavily on statistical sampling rather than individual inspection. And history has proven again and again that these are the exact conditions where rare anomalies are born. The Washington quarter design was already decades old by then, familiar to everyone, almost invisible in daily life, which is precisely why the 1989 P issues slipped through unnoticed for so long. Because nobody was looking closely, nobody expected anything special, and rarity loves nothing more than low expectations. Years later, as collectors began re-examining late 20th century coinage with modern technology, something strange emerged. a pattern of ultra-fine inconsistencies appearing on a microscopic number of 1989 P. Washington quarters, inconsistencies that didn't match known errors, didn't fit established varieties, and didn't behave like random damage or postman alteration. These quarters showed subtle but repeatable deviations in strike depth, edge formation, and internal metal distribution, almost as if the coins had been struck under conditions that briefly deviated from standard protocol. And that's where the theories exploded. Some experts believe a limited run of 1989 P quarters were struck using improperly annealed planchets, resulting in a unique metal flow signature invisible to the naked eye but unmistakable under magnification, while others argue that a short-lived die alignment error created a micro-series of coins with structural characteristics that technically classify them as a distinct subtype, one that was never documented, never acknowledged, and never supposed to exist. And when collectors realized that these anomalies were appearing together, not alone, the tone shifted from curiosity to obsession. Private transactions began taking place quietly. No headlines, no flashy auction catalogs, just closed rooms, non-disclosure agreements, and serious money moving hands. Because when a coin has the potential to become a modern legend, discretion becomes part of its value. One insider account described a meeting where a single pristine example of an anomalous 1989 P quarter was placed on the table, examined by multiple experts independently, each reaching the same chilling conclusion: this coin does not fit into our current understanding of U.S. mint production. That sentence alone is enough to send shockwaves through the numismatic world, because classification is everything, and when a coin escapes classification, it becomes priceless. What drives collectors wild is not just the potential value, but the possibility that more examples are still out there, hiding in old proof sets, circulation finds, inherited jars, quietly waiting for someone to look closer, someone to ask the right questions. How many people have handled a 1989 P quarter without a second glance? How many have spent one this week? That thought creates a kind of urgency that money alone can't buy. And just like the quarter before it, this coin has reignited debates about modern rarities, forcing collectors to confront an uncomfortable truth: that the age of a coin doesn't determine its importance, discovery does. As this story unfolds, you'll start to notice eerie parallels between this quarter and the one we discussed earlier. Similar production pressures, similar silence followed by sudden interest, similar resistance from skeptics before the evidence began piling up, and that's no coincidence. There is a pattern forming here, a trail of breadcrumbs leading towards something even bigger, because if two Washington quarters from different years can carry this level of mystery and potential, what happens when we reach the next one? Later, we'll step into the final chapter of this journey, a quarter that many believe sits at the peak of this entire saga, the one that ties all the clues together and leaves even hardened collectors speechless. But we're not there yet, and you won't want to miss how this story escalates. For now, let this sink in. In 1989, P. Washington quarter, common by appearance, legendary by implication, a coin that proves fortunes don't always glitter. Sometimes they jingle quietly in your pocket. And if you think this revelation is shocking, take a breath, because the next Washington quarter takes everything you think you understand and turns it completely upside down. Last 1984, P. Washington quarter. Imagine reaching into an old jar and pulling out a coin that collectors would fight over. A coin so deceptively ordinary that even seasoned professionals once ignored it. And yet today it stands at the absolute peak of modern numismatic shock. A quarter that has forced experts to rewrite rulebooks and swallow their own skepticism. Picture this for a moment. A Washington quarter dated 1984, struck at the Philadelphia Mint. No special finish, no flashy metal, no obvious warning signs. And yet behind that familiar face of George Washington lies a story so intense that it has pushed estimated valuations toward a staggering $140 million. And before you question how that could even be possible, remember that every legendary coin began as something people underestimated. Stay with me all the way through, because this is the grand finale, the moment where every clue we've uncovered so far converges. And by the end of this journey, you'll understand why many collectors believe the 1984 P. Washington quarter may be the most dangerous pocket change coin ever released into circulation. Now let's travel back to 1984, a year of transition, pressure, and silent experimentation inside the U.S. Mint, a time when production quotas were high, public demand for coinage was relentless, and internal processes were quietly evolving to keep up, especially at the Philadelphia Mint, which carried the heavy responsibility of producing massive volumes without mint marks for much of America's circulating coinage. Quarters in particular were being struck at incredible speed. Dies were pushed far beyond ideal lifespans. Planchets moved through production lines with minimal interruption, and quality control focused on averages rather than outliers. And as numismatic history has proven repeatedly, it is within these exact conditions that anomalies slip through, unnoticed, undocumented, and later, unstoppable. The Washington quarter design by 1984 had become almost invisible to the public eye, so familiar that people rarely examined it. And that familiarity became the perfect camouflage for something extraordinary, because rarity loves to hide where nobody is looking. Years later, when advanced collectors began revisiting late 20th century coinage with modern analytical tools, the 1984 P. Washington quarter began appearing in whispered conversations, not loudly, not publicly, but in the kind of hushed tones reserved for discoveries that could upend reputations if proven wrong. The first red flags were subtle, almost dismissible, minute differences in relief depth across supposedly identical examples, edge formations that suggested irregular collar engagement, and internal metal flow characteristics that didn't align with standard Philadelphia Mint production norms of the era. At first, many experts brushed it off as coincidence, but then patterns emerged, and patterns are where numismatics turn serious. A microscopic subset of 1984 P quarters began showing a consistent cluster of anomalies, not one error, not two, but a constellation of traits appearing together, suggesting these coins were born from a brief but distinct production circumstance, something that occurred, passed, and was never officially recorded. Speculation exploded. Some believe these quarters were struck during a short experimental phase involving altered strike pressure settings. Others argued that emergency die pairings were used following equipment issues, while a more radical theory suggested a transitional metallurgical composition test that was never meant to enter circulation. What fueled the fire was the consistency, because randomness doesn't repeat itself cleanly, but intentional or systemic deviations do. Imagine a collector discovering one of these quarters, initially unimpressed, then slowly realizing that every test raises more questions than answers. Weight slightly off, but not enough to fail casual inspection. Composition percentages deviating just enough to matter. Strike sharpness contradicting known die or timelines. And suddenly the room gets quiet. Because silence is what happens when experts realize they are standing at the edge of something enormous. Private examinations followed, not announced, not marketed, just quiet confirmations stacking up one by one, each adding credibility, each pushing skepticism further into the background. Then came the private negotiations, the kind that never make headlines, where collectors with resources far beyond public auctions compete not for bragging rights, but for control of history. And it was during these exchanges that valuations began climbing into territory previously reserved for the most legendary American coins ever struck. What makes the 1984 P. Washington quarter so powerful isn't just its rarity. It's the fact that it exists at the intersection of modern circulation and elite numismatic mystery. A coin that challenges the deeply held belief that modern equals common. And that belief is exactly why so many examples may still be out there, unseen, untested, waiting. Think about how many 1984 quarters passed through hands for decades. How many sat in drawers? How many were spent without thought? How many still sit in collections labeled ordinary? And let that realization settle in, because it creates a sense of urgency that no price tag ever could. This quarter doesn't just represent potential wealth. It represents missed opportunity, the haunting idea that fortune doesn't announce itself. It whispers, and only those who listen closely ever hear it. And here's the moment where everything comes together, because when experts compared the timelines, production conditions, and anomaly profiles of the 1996 D, the 1989 P, and finally the 1984 P. Washington quarters, a chilling pattern emerged, not random flukes, not isolated incidents, but a quiet trail of modern quarters slipping through under extreme production pressure, each one rarer and more impactful than the last, culminating right here. Many now believe the 1984 P is the apex of that pattern, the purest expression of a perfect storm inside the mint, a coin that shouldn't exist in its current form, and yet does, defiantly, silently, waiting to be found. This is why collectors call it the ultimate sleeper, the final boss of pocket change, because unlike flashy errors that scream for attention, this quarter demands knowledge, patience, and belief. If you've stayed with me this far, understand this: history doesn't always live in museums. Sometimes it lives in jars, in boxes, in old albums forgotten on shelves, and sometimes, just sometimes, it lives in the change you pass every single day. The 1984 P. Washington quarter stands as proof that the greatest discoveries are still possible, that legends are still being written, and that the next life-changing find could be closer than anyone dares to imagine. And as this journey closes, remember this feeling, because the moment you stop looking is the moment history slips through your fingers, quietly, just like a quarter.